Ready for more stories? Welcome to Reminiscing, our Highline history, a radio show presenting the memories of our community in the Highline area. Listen to a new episode every week, Monday and Tuesday, with your host, Roger Price, at 106.5 LP FM, South King County.
Okay, good morning. I'm Roger Price, and I'm one of the volunteers at the Highline Heritage Museum. And this morning I have Tim Robinson here, and he's going to tell us about his history in the Highline area, Burien White Center, and so that should be interesting. He kind of grew up in the Salmon Creek area, so I want to start out by saying welcome, Tim, and I'd like to ask you a few questions about growing up when you were, just a grade school kid, once you got started.
Well, I was born out at Reminiscing Heights, near where would become SeaTac Airport, before the airport was there, 1945. Spent the first 5.5 years of my life in Reminiscing Heights, and eventually moved to Top Hat up by Beverly Park. So I started kind of kindergarten at Beverly Park. They had, the baby boom created a lot of portables in those days. For a lot of elementary schools in the area. And so I went to school the first day at 9 a.m. and I walked at almost 6, I think, and I wasn't tall enough to reach the door to the portable. And so I sat on the steps outside because I didn't know if anybody was in the building. So the teacher came to the door and pushed it open and looked down at me and asked me my name, and I told her, and she said, well, you're not supposed to be here till noon. And I went, oh, because it was apparently 9 to noon and noon to 3 in those days. So I walked back home and told my mom that I didn't want to go to school, that they didn't want me. So my dad came home, and he was working at the White Center News at that time. He had just acquired it. So he took me back at noon, and I had a great day in the class, and eventually discovered that I liked going to school. So that was Beverly Park.
So eventually, then after Beverly Park, you went on to Puget Sound Junior High.
We moved when I was in 4th grade over to Salmon Creek, where I ended up going to Hazel Valley Elementary School. And I had a wonderful teacher there in 5th grade named Elsie Kalenius, who I have admired to this day. We lost her back in the turn of the century here, but a terrific teacher. She had a tennis shoe in the drawer behind her desk, and at the start of class, she brought it out and she said, I hope I don't have to use this. And that was enough of a threat. Those were the days of corporal punishment. You can't do that today, but I think a lot of us kids probably thought, I don't want to get swatted by that tennis shoe, because swatting in with boards with holes in them and tennis shoes and everything else, spankings and sent to school, were allowed in those days. So kids were maybe more well behaved back in the 50s. But anyway, I didn't ever get the tennis shoe from Miss Kalenius, but I did admire her teaching style and herself in general.
So from then on, then you went on to Puget Sound.
I did. Went to Puget Sound, walked every day to school up 124th Street and over to the school. There's no bus service for Puget Sound because I lived within the range. There was bus service for Hazel Valley, but I would always sleep in, and I have to run to school up 134th Street to get to Hazel Valley, and I often was there before the bus got there. But at Puget Sound, I walked every day, and that was the start of the rock and roll era in those days. And so we had our radio tuned to KGR and the top 40, and I would walk by myself 99% of the time humming the top 40 songs on my way to school.
So then after Puget Sound, of course, I don't know, did you have any play any athletics at Puget Sound, or was that the more?
No, I was pretty small. I was a little kid. I was in the back of the comic books. They had a muscle building course by Charles Atlas, and it would show a kind of a bully kid on the beach, pushing another kid down or kicking sand in his face. Well, I was the other kid. So I was 96 pounds and 4'11" when I went into 7th grade at Puget Sound Junior High School. So my dad took us down to Seattle to give us boxing lessons at Eagles Gym with a notable Northwest middleweight fighter, middleweight, maybe light middleweight or whatever is below middleweight, and a guy named Joy Velez, who I dearly loved. He was really good with the kids, but he taught us how to put up our fists and run the speed bag and jump rope and put on these giant marshmallow-sized gloves and then kind of do fisticuffs in the ring. And so we learned that over a summer. But because of that, my neighborhood and friends would often tell others that I had boxing lessons. I had 3 months of them. It was enough for them to challenge me, even as a little kid. So I was successful in the sense that I was fast. I wasn't big or strong and didn't have any weight on me, but I was quick. And that helped me defend myself against other kids. I had 3 or 4 fights in junior high only because kids wanted to challenge me, not because I ever picked a fight.
And plus, also, you had 3 brothers. Also, one older, wasn't it, and 2 younger?
I have 5 boys in the family, 2 older and 2 younger. I was a middle child, and my oldest brother, Mike, went to Evergreen. My next oldest brother, Ken, went to Highline because we were right on the border in Salmon Creek. You could choose to go either. Well, many of the friends I had went to Evergreen, so I chose to go there, and it was a little closer than Highline. So I was at Evergreen mostly because that's what kids do when they have friends there.
And you had did you turn out for any sports when you were going to Evergreen?
No, I was still pretty small. And when I arrived at Evergreen, I was about 5'3.5" and maybe 115 pounds. I was very good athletically, but I was so small that my mother said, "I'm afraid you'll get hurt. I'm not signing your performance slip to be able to play, your permission slip, I mean." So I didn't get to play. So I was envious of the other players because I wanted to play. I thought I loved football, of course, but I ended up becoming a manager of the team as a junior when I was 5'5" and about 118 pounds. So I actually graduated high school at about 5'7.5" and maybe 140 pounds. So I was very much a late bloomer in that regard. I did play on the golf team, which you didn't require any size. So
did you while you were at Evergreen, did you have a teacher that stood out to you then too, like you did at Hazel Valley? Or?
Well, as I said, at Hazel Valley, Miss Kalenius was a real inspiration for me, and also Dolly Garrison, who was the vice principal at Evergreen for a long time, and I always liked her, but I didn't realize how smart she was until I read her obituary from Whidbey Island several years ago about her accomplishments, and that just impressed me all the more, the character she had and the degrees she had and the concern she had for the students, and her operation at Evergreen was admirable. I really liked her.
So in your time there, growing up during junior high, there must have been times when you got a little mischievous with your brothers, and maybe got into a little bit of trouble. Nothing real serious, but
I was a pretty good kid. I remember in 7th grade, we acquired some cap guns, and I was sitting in the front row in the English class, and I decided to take it out of my pocket and put it in the desk, and I was fiddling with it when the teacher left the room, and it went off. And I got outed by some class members, and so they sent me to the office, and I was sitting in the principal's office, and the principal called my dad at work and said, "We got your kid here. He fired a cap gun in class. What do you want us to do?" And my dad said, "Swat him." So I got a couple of swats with the paddle for misbehaving in the English class. So that was probably the extent of my getting in trouble with the school folks. So yeah.
So while you were at Puget Sound, you probably I imagine your bicycle was your main means of transportation back then.
It was. I rode a bike everywhere, of course, like most kids, and I put playing cards in the spokes to make it look like a motorbike, and we tried to go as fast as we could down the street and hit the brakes, Bendix brakes, and try to see how far we could skid. I towed a hydroplane behind my bike made out of wood that we made downstairs in the shop at Salmon Creek, and we would drive over stuff and it would flip and you didn't have to stop and ride it again. We had races with the hydroplanes because hydroplanes were very, very popular up here in the late 50s. So in fact, I rode my bike to school as a sophomore on the first day and did not realize that some sophomore kids were already driving and had cars. So I only rode to school once at Evergreen with my bike. After that, I walked. So in fact, I'd walk to Puget Sound all the time, but I still had the bike, and they had bike racks at Evergreen. And they probably had them at Puget Sound, but I probably just ignored them at the time because Puget Sound, which was actually further than Evergreen for me, I just thought I should be riding my bike, maybe because it was a newer bike. So I only rode it once to school. I think I pretty much put the bike away when I became a sophomore at Evergreen.
So they had was Cascade Junior High built at that time?
Oh, yeah. Cascade was there. I think they built it right around the same time that they built Evergreen, or pretty close, because the first graduating class at Evergreen was 1959, and I think some of those kids might have attended Cascade. I'm not positive about that, but I know many later kids did, but because it was the feeder school for Evergreen. But yeah, I think Cascade and Evergreen may have been built about the same time.
So while your dad had the White Center News, did he have you working, delivering papers for the newspaper? Or?
Well, that's a great question, Roger. I started working at the White Center News probably in 1957 when I was about 10 or 11. And I washed windows, I scraped floors. We had what was called offset newspaper, which means we used type on paper that we would have to wax and build into a page. And there would be lots of trimmings, wax trimmings on the floor because they were pretty busy with the paper every Wednesday night for a Thursday publication. So I would have to come in Thursday after school and start scraping the floors of all the wax bits. As I got older, I got to do photography for the paper and work in the darkroom. And even in high school, I was allowed to melt lead for the linotype machines, which are typesetting machines that we used in those days. And the lead is a lead ingot of about 30 inches long, maybe not quite that, but it's about 3 inches wide, 30 inches long, and it hangs in the machine, but they have to be poured into a form that allows them to cool, and then when they're cool, they can be picked up and put into the machine hanging from a hook, and that lead is then formed into typefaces for the page.
Wow, that was a good experience and working, so it worked out pretty good.
Well, I sold ads and I delivered papers and cleaned up and just a lot of things within the paper. I worked at the front counter, so I think my brother Ken and I had more friends in the business community than we had at school because we saw them all the time. We were always at the office after school. So we knew many of the White Center and eventually some of the Burien business people as our company acquired the Highline Times in the 70s, early 70s.
So after you graduated from Evergreen, then you decided to join the service.
I did. It was right at the start of the Vietnam War, and I didn't want to be drafted. So I was at Highline College, and nearly all of my friends had entered the military. I think they had the same feeling I did, that there was a big concern at that time because we didn't really have the experience of a war prior to that, like kids in the 40s and 50s went to Korean War. But so a lot of us said we wanted to control our fate, so I joined the military for 4 years and ended up serving 2 years in Massachusetts and 2 years in Germany in a reconnaissance squadron. We made bombing charts for Vietnam for the pilots. I worked in a printing facility, but go figure, probably because I had experience in the newspaper and photography, and so my aptitude was towards that when you test you, and they just said, okay, you know about cameras, you know about printing, we're going to put you in a reconnaissance squadron, and they did.
So when you got your military obligation out of the way, you came back to Burien
and started working for the paper again. So I was working then in the camera department because that's what I finished as when in Germany. I worked in what was called the reconnaissance camera studio, and we made the target charts there. So when I got out, I was very familiar with the equipment that the company had here, and I would take pictures of all the pages at night while going to school during the day.
So you also had experience with, I believe it was the Evergreen Pool and Tennis Club up by, that used to be by the airport.
When I was in junior high and early high school, there was a facility called the Evergreen Tennis Club, and it was right next to where the third runway is now. And they had a deep diving pool, they had tennis courts, they had a wonderful swimming pool. You had to be a member. We did stories on it. I think there's some in the Highline Times on it. But I got to go there a couple of times, and it was quite fun. So, I don't recall being a regular. I was probably more at the Highline Swim Club, where I took swim lessons in 1958 from Earl McKinney, who was a swim coach at Highline High School in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, back when they had the Burien had a swimming pool on about 154th, I believe, just off of Ambaum.
Yeah, between 153rd and 154th, and they eventually put a bonnet on it, a big cover. But it was open in those days, and we would walk in the summer of 58. I think we walked from Salmon Creek down Ambaum all the way to the pool in the morning, summer morning, and then we'd walk home. Everybody walked in those days. Even if you had a bike, you wouldn't take it. You just walked to something like that. So.
And about what year did you meet your wife?
Many years later than that, of course. I was running a semi-pro football team while I was the sports and feature editor at the Highline Times in the early 70s. And I met her in 1976, so we kind of fast forward a little bit on that. I had been running a semi-pro football team because I was so impressed with the athletes in the area, and I never got to play when I was in high school or junior high school. But by the time I got out of the military, I was about 6 feet tall and 175 pounds and very athletic. So I started the team because I wanted to play. And what I discovered is that there's some really excellent athletes in the area. David Lutz comes to mind, who went to Mount Vernon High School in the early 70s, and Mike Crowdy, who went to Glacier and on to Notre Dame, and Dave was at the UW, and so I formed a bond with Dave that I still have today, and he brought in a number of UW players that had not been selected to go to the NFL. So we formed a pretty good football team, and eventually, by 1978, we won the league title. And I was very proud of that. So I sold the team that same year and lived with the fact that I'd done what I tried to do. I recruited a lot of good athletes and discovered how good I wasn't and how good they were. So I was just the president and general manager of the team for about 4 years. So.
4 years, yeah, and that was the Burien Flyers, wasn't it?
It was the Burien Flyers. It started out as the SeaTac Flyers, and Del Adair of Adair's Restaurant was a big sponsor of ours. Jim Bibby, who ran a sporting goods store here in town, was a supplier for us, and we just dearly loved Jim because he was really invested in us and the team. And we managed to try 1 year in Renton to see how that might work. We became the Renton Flyers in 1974, we having started in 73. We came back to Burien, and I went to Larry O'Neill at the Highline District, and I said, Larry, I had my hat in my hands, and I said, I need to come back to Highline Stadium. Renton didn't work out. I'm changing the name of the team to the Burien Flyers, and I want to rent Highline Stadium. And he welcomed me back, and we had a great rapport with Larry for a number of years, a really good guy. And we played the rest of our time at Highline Stadium.
So that was a pretty successful business you got started there, and the team had to travel some distance back in those days.
We did. We
get
went by
opponents.
car caravan half the time. We ended up in Mount Vernon, or we were down in Thurston County. We were over in Kitsap County. There were a number of really good teams in those days. Seattle Cavaliers comes to mind, and Pierce County Bengals down in Sumner were a perennial favorite. We ended up successfully beating them a couple of times in the late 70s, and we're proud of that too. So I think overall it was really good for the community to have that. It was right before the Seahawks formed in 1976, so we had a pretty good audience for that because there just wasn't anything that big around at that time, for football anyway, except UW, of course. And I'm a big UW fan. I'm a big Hugh McElhenney fan. He's been a hero of mine for since I was probably 8 or 9. And I eventually ended up in a golf group called the Advertising Golf Association. And I met Hugh, who was a member, and he came out to my business. We can talk about that later, I suppose, but I sat with Hugh for about an hour, and it's hard not to be kind of googly-eyed at your hero as he's telling you stories about the San Francisco 49ers, and I'm trying to remain not as crazy as it probably looked when I was talking to him, because I was 40 and he was probably 65 or 70 or something like that. And I just held him in such high admiration for so long and wanted to be him when I was a kid. So Hurricane Hugh, they called him.
Yes, I can recall Hugh at the UW and then going on to the 49ers, and he had quite a good career, and he also he was well known for a breakaway speed, running away from his opponents with the 49ers and the Huskies. So
he was. Yeah.
He just he was kind of a highlight around here for many years.
Yeah. He almost had an NFL franchise. It was going to be called the Seattle Kings back before.
Oh yes, I remember.
The Seahawks came in. So Hugh eventually retired and moved to Las Vegas. He passed away here a year or two ago. I was sorry to see it, but that's life goes on. But I did admire him for many, many years.
So when you sold your football team, what happened to him after?
I think they played the 79 and 80 seasons, and I think the team disbanded after 1980. So the league kept going, and many other really good teams were formed after that. One of my very close friends, Phil Pompeo, who was a Burien guy, went to Highline. I think he graduated in 1970, went into the Navy, came out, and ended up turning out for the Flyers in 73. He got injured, never got to play again, but he became my general manager on the team, and he did a stupendous job of operating the team for me and with me. And he was probably the reason that we were successful behind the scenes in terms of organization. He went on to work with the Pierce County Bengals and the Auburn Panthers, and he coached some girls softball teams. Very, very involved. But he was from West Seattle, but it became a kind of a Burienite in the late 60s, and ever since then. Lives in SeaTac now. Super guy.
So sometime in here in this time frame, you met your wife.
I did. In fact, those were the days I had been working at a clothing store before I worked at the Highline Times, selling clothing. And in those days, everything was knit. And I worked down on Rainier Avenue, and it carried over for me. In 1976, at the height of the disco era, I was wearing these knit pantsuits almost matching, and my wife thought they were horrendous, but I could dunk a basketball in those things because they were so light. But she was glad that I finally got rid of all of them, but they were so easy to wear, that, and I think they were fairly popular at the time. But I met her in 1976, and we got married in 1978. About the time I sold the team.
Ah,
So I figured I better get responsible. At least my dad said that. He says, "When are you going to grow up, son? When are you going to buckle down now and get ready for business and stop playing football?"
make a living, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I ran that team for 5 years and got married in '78 and sold the team and started a family. Moved out to Federal Way and bought a house right underneath the flight path. Did not realize that at the time. I guess I was oblivious to it, but I apparently didn't bother me that much. I stayed there for 7 years. With those planes, it seemed like they were 100 feet over your head. But they were good years, and so that's when we had our first boy, Chris. We moved, and we had a second child. We actually stayed in Federal Way, but we moved to a area in West Campus, and we had our second child, and we've got two boys. They're now, I think, 41 and 37, right in there, and one of them lives in Enumclaw, and one lives in Vashon. Very proud of them.
And your grandpa?
Twice now, yeah. Our oldest boy, Chris, is two children, a girl and a boy. Married to Amanda Knox, who is well known for having been incarcerated in Italy for 4 years for a crime she didn't commit. She's written a book about it, and she's very involved in the Innocence Project nationally and internationally.
So prior to or just after your football team you sold, you also were involved in softball, playing softball, as a kind of the coach, manager, and I can remember playing on the team. It was actually a lot of fun. I loved playing softball.
Well, I was always athletic as a youngster. I remember many nights out in the back of my garage. I had a mud basketball court. I call it mud because it rains here a lot, and the basketball would get caked with dirt. And I'd shoot till 10 or 10:15 at night till my mother would get angry and ask me to come in. My hands are just filled with dirt, but I kept saying, one more shot, just one more shot. And it was a corner, or it was a long shot, or it was something. I just had to keep shooting. And so, because I loved baseball too, I loved playing more than watching. So I never played on the baseball team at high school either. So because I was on the golf team in those years, because they were at the same time. So I ended up forming teams at school, and eventually the Flyers football team, and and we had a business down in Tukwila that printed the papers, so I formed a slow pitch team for that. I was always liked playing and maybe leading, and so I got to participate in that as well. So I formed what they call a modified fast pitch team that you played on with some of our friends, and we were very successful. That was at Mosier Field in those days, and we had a lot of fun playing, and there are fond memories of some of the players. Joe Wheaton, a local mailman, was one of our favorite players, because if any one of us could get on base, Joe invariably, he's kind of like the Sultan of SWAT locally here, because he could hit these towering home runs, and we appreciated Joe quite a bit.
So of all your brothers and siblings, you were probably the athlete of the family. Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Correct.
Most of them. We're all kind of academics in that sense, because our mother was and our dad was. So we adopted a lot of writing skills and oratory skills, and being involved in the newspaper for as long as we are and have been. I just wanted to pursue athletics, so I tried baseball and basketball and golf and football and even bowling. I was a very successful bowler for a long time, and enjoyed it. I had some great scores and some flops, but that goes with the territory. But I was on bowling teams, and I recall one instance of of my good friend Phil Pompeo inviting me out to Olympic Bowl over on Des Moines Way. And I showed up late. I didn't realize I was late, but my ball that I'd had been rolling around in the back of my truck for probably a year, and it was just dented and grimy, and because I had pretty much given up bowling, and so I had to put it in the Luster King machine for 50 cents that'll clean your ball up. I did it, and it came out. It didn't look very good, so I put another 50 cents in, and all the while my team is starting to bowl, and I don't realize it. I didn't even have a shirt yet because it was the start of the league. So it comes out fairly decent after the second Luster King, and I walked over, and Phil says, "Where you been?" And I said, "Well, I didn't realize I was supposed to start, but I thought I had time." He says, "No, you're already 2 frames behind." So he sends me up, and I bowl, and I happen to get a strike. No warm-up, I just get a strike. Then I come back over to the other lane, and I get a strike again. Next time I'm called up on third lane, I get a strike, and I ended up getting 6 strikes in a row. And the team members who didn't know me, except for Phil, were saying, "Who is this guy, Earl Anthony?" And so someone went up to the front desk and told the announcer that I was working on a 300 game. So I get up there for my 7th frame, and the entire alley shuts down, quiet as you can hear a pin drop. And I'd made 6 strikes with all the clamor, and now all the eyes are focused on me, and I rolled the ball and hit rabbit ears, and I was just, everybody just dismayed. So, but I ended up coming back with a spare strike spare, something like that, with a 262. So I was pretty proud of that, and I think I still have that trophy.
I bet.
But I also did a story on the owner of the Olympic Bowl. My memory is being challenged right now, but you remember the owner of the Olympic Bowl? He's from Chicago. He used to work as a runner for Al Capone.
Wasn't it Frank?
Yeah, Frank Cole. Frank Cole, wonderful man. He owned the bowling alley, and he was a runner for Al Capone in the 30s when he was a teenager. And he told me the stories about being in Chicago and coming out here in the 40s, and in the 50s he started the bowling alley. But there is a story about him in the Highline Times from probably 1974, 75, somewhere in there. I was working at the paper then doing features and taking pictures, so Frank was a good one to interview. So was Ernie Eder. The Eder family started the tin shop in Burien in the 30s with Ernie and his dad basically working together. Then his dad was John, and then his grandson was John. So they were all the Eder family, wonderful family, was working at the tin shop, and it's now the Tin Room and the Tin Room Theater. So that's pretty cool.
Yes, that was it was been around for so many years. The tin room and the tin shop. There's a lot of pictures of that posted on the museum Facebook page. But getting back to the bowling, back when Burien had about 3 bowling alleys back in the late 50s.
They had Burien Bowl, which is owned by a guy named Bud. I don't remember his last name, but we were in there as teenagers. It's on Ambaum. So we would go in and play pinball, and I don't think we ever really bowled. We just wanted to play pinball for a nickel or something like that. They had Highline Lanes, which was next to the Target Ballroom, where we danced as teenagers. And it's now the Highline Administration Building, just off of Ambaum there at about 156th or so. And there was also Olympic Bowl, which was on Des Moines Way. So bowling was really popular.
And also Lewis and Clark.
Well, Lewis and Clark, and I was at Lewis and Clark in a event, and I was bowling. When my turn came up, it's warm in there, people are smoking, and I put my hand down to dry my hand on the little button, and I accidentally pushed the button on the opposing alley, and just as a person was bowling, and I knew it immediately that the gate was going to come down, the sweeper gate. So I immediately jumped up and went back up and started sipping on my Diet Cola while the gate came down just as the ball hit it and left a big dent in it. And everyone's quite shocked because I was standing up behind the rack of bowling balls up in the upper level. And it didn't break it, it just bent it pretty much. But it made a pretty good noise, and no one ever found out it was me. I feel terrible about it now, but at the time, it was sort of.
You pulled a fast one on them
I
that
did,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
They had great pool tables. The theater was a wonderful theater, huge, the biggest screen in the Northwest, I think, maybe even west of the Mississippi. I don't even know that, but saw many shows there, including the Ten Commandments, which we watched with great intrigue and interest. And we came home at 10 o'clock that night, and my mother asked my older brother Ken if he learned anything, and Ken said, yeah, I read the book, which meant the Bible, which he hadn't, but he conned my mom a little bit. Anyway, we enjoyed going to the Lewis and Clark. We probably went more to Walt Coy's Highline Theater than we did the Lewis and Clark, because Lewis and Clark was over on Highway 99, and the Highline Theater was literally on First Avenue, walking distance, and we were there a lot. So many friends that we spent time with at the Highline Theater. Gary Coy was actually working for his dad. Gary Coy's a Highline grad, and a terrific man. But he was working in the theater, and he said that his dad put goldfish in the lobby so that people would throw coins in there, and then Gary's job was to clean it all out every weekend and take all the coins. But it was a clever way to make some money to pay for the fish, but also for the company, because everybody would throw a penny or a nickel or even a dime in there, occasionally a quarter if you felt like it. They think they're just having a fun time making a wish or whatever, but having a trout pond was a pretty good idea that Walt had, and it made sense because he made some extra cash.
And he also had the White Center Theater.
Walt did, yeah, he did. And he would go downtown and rent the movies. We did a story in the White Center News about Walt Coy, a regular, clever businessman who managed to work his way up in the film industry, renting the films and running the theaters. And I think he did a pretty good job of attracting folks to his theaters with the films that he rented in Seattle. In those days, you had to go into Seattle to get any of the films. Now I think they're all mail order. If it's even online, you can get it. So it's like Netflix has taken over in effect. So
Yes, I think I read a history one time where they used to pop the popcorn in the basement of the White Center Theater, Coy's Theater, and then they would transport it over to the First Avenue Theater.
I'm not surprised. Yeah. Gary, if you get a chance to interview Gary, he's a terrific person and a great knowledge of the area and what his dad did at the theaters. And like we were there on Friday nights. In those days, it was always a double feature with a newsreel and a cartoon in between. So if we didn't like the first picture, we hoped we'd see the second one. But it was a 4.5 hour deal. We'd go there at 6 and we'd be out by 10:30 or so on a Friday night. Then we'd just walk home. And what's interesting about it is that we felt fairly safe in those days walking home, and usually more than one of us. But still, you could walk home without any angst. I don't think you can really say that as much today. It's just a different attitude about things. But we call it the halcyon days of the 50s, at least around here, because people were, it was a kinder, gentler time, I think. So.
Well, gee, Tim, this has been an awfully good interview, and I don't know if there's something that left out or if you'd like to add anything, but yes, you covered pretty much your whole growing up period in Burien and White Center. So I really appreciate you coming in and doing this for us today.
Well, I enjoy talking about it. I think I have a pretty good memory for some of those events long ago. And I worked with the alumni committee at a high school because a lot of those kids I grew up with went to some of the same schools. Some went to Mountain View Elementary, some went to White Center Heights, some went to Salmon Creek. So we all share a kindred spirit there growing up in the area and playing in Salmon Creek, if nothing else, and playing in the woods as kids and being adventurers and really just watching the changes come. You remember Ambon was a 2-lane road for a long time. Cement. that Jacob Ambaum actually helped create right around, well, we did a story on him, but around 1912, I think, when the trolley was active.
That's correct.
Cars were just starting to come into the area, and so Jacob had the idea of creating a highway from White Center all the way to Seahurst, end of Seahurst by the post office, and he did. It followed the trolley line, so pretty impressive undertaking. And it was picks and shovels and wheelbarrows, so it's pretty impressive what he did. So, but I grew up right in the middle of that in 1950. So we enjoyed Ambaum and walking along it and driving on it and that sort of thing. But there's a good story in the paper about Jacob.
Well, great. That's good. Thank you, Tim. So we will we'll go into your business part of the story in the next segment of this interview.
Okay.